Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you guys are new, my name is Daniel, and in this video I'm going to be going over the best settings for car photography part 2. It is actually my most viewed video to date on my channel, so I wanted to make a second or a part 2 of it because it's been 2 years already. The video I made 2 years ago for camera settings for car photography was dedicated towards ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. I wanted to switch it up a little bit in this one, the updated version, and do more of a situation, different situations when you're going to take these photos of cars. Before I go into different situations, I want to first start off by sort of explaining how I get all these photos, you know, where I'm located, what I do. For those of you guys who don't know, I live in Orange County now, in Irvine, which is the mecca of, I would say, supercars in the United States, maybe even the world. So I have these opportunities to see a lot of these nice cars. I personally am more into supercars, exotics. However, I do go see JDM sometimes. There's a car club called Origins Kazuku that's run by a couple of my friends. So I go to that, and that's a little bit more focused on the JDM side. Living in Irvine, Orange County, I get access to all these cars. That's why you're going to see a lot of these photos and wonder, oh, how am I getting all these, you know, shots of these cool cars? Because I'm here in Orange County. If you guys are wanting to see these cars, just come by. You know, after COVID's done, come by and then you'll see these cars every single day, mostly on the weekends. Now back to the topic. The first situation I'm going to be talking about when you want to dial in your camera settings for taking car photos is at car shows. Just sit still photos you're going to be taking of the car. In this situation, the camera settings that you want to be dialed in is going to be a little bit flexible. You have flexibility with the shutter speed as long as you're one over your length of your lens. So for example, if I have a 30mm, you want to be at least 1 over 30 you know, frames for shutter speed. As long as you're over that, you're good. And you obviously don't want to shake it or else it's going to be blurry. But shutter speed, you're going to have flexibility with that, and then in which you're going to have flexibility with the aperture and the ISO. If you're shooting wide angle, you don't have to worry about too much aperture because it's going to grab most things in focus. And then the ISO, if it's dark, you want to, you know, crank that up a little bit to get a good exposure. Things are going to be a little bit different for people who have different focal length lenses. If you're shooting a very tight lens, with a very tight lens, such as an 85mm, you want to have an aperture where you're going to grab everything that you want of the subject. So that means maybe going up to f4 or f6.3 compared to if you're shooting with a wide lens, for example 24mm, and you want to shoot a certain subject. You know, you could have that, you know, wide range to play with. If your lens could go down to a f1.4, it'll still most likely grab what you want in focus. So that does vary. Play around with a little bit. Just be careful when you're shooting with a very tight lens that if you shoot with a too low of an aperture, it's most likely not going to grab everything that you want in focus. The next situation are rolling shots. For this, it's a little bit tricky in terms of camera settings because every camera is different. If you have a full frame, if you have a APS-C, that does actually make a difference because of the sensor size. But the main key point is you want to be at the right shutter speed, or else it's going to not get what you want in focus, and it's just not going to turn out good. I can't recommend an exact number of the shutter speed that you want to be working with. You have to test it out yourself. On my camera, I need a little bit higher because I'm using an APS-C camera, a Sony a6500. If I was using a full frame, such as an a7 III, I could probably work with a, you know, lower shutter speed. So I'm working with around 1 over 120, 100. That works for me. The aperture, you could just play around that too. There's no magic number. whatever the exposure is what you want to get correct. And you have the ISO 2 to play around, the aperture, shutter speed. So you set the shutter speed, and then you play with the aperture a little bit to get the right exposure. And then if it's too dark, you could raise that ISO up to have that right exposure. Before I move on to the last situation, I think it's a good time for me to talk about exposure, since I've been talking about it so much. For you guys who are beginners or just getting started with car photography, you guys might be wondering, how do I expose this frame where the sky is very bright and then you're shooting a very dark car? So you have two contrasting exposures. Now the answer to that is always expose for the sky. The reason why is because if you're shooting raw, which everyone should be, you have the option in post to bring up the shadows and lighten up the car, and you could keep your highlights intact. When you blow out your highlights, it's very, very hard to correct it in post and bring the highlights down if it's already blown out. That's why you should always expose for the sky, because you have the option to bring up the shadows post. And for other shots too, general rule of thumb you want to keep is always better to underexpose than to overexpose, because you have that option to bring it back in post. Just have that in your mind. You have the option to play around with it in post. All right, the last situation, nighttime. This is a little bit more tricky. You need some good lighting and good environment to properly shoot good photos at the nighttime. The settings you want to have when you're shooting nighttime photography of cars is anything that could properly expose your frame. This is going to mean that you're going to have a really low shutter speed. That means that you're going to have to bring a tripod. So when you're shooting nighttime photography, you should bring a tripod because you could play with the shutter speed. Having a low shutter speed is going to bring more exposure, more light into the sensor. And also, having a fast aperture, which is a low number aperture, is also going to do that. And you could also play with the ISO to just properly expose the shot. Now another thing you could do is you could bring some light of your own. You could bring a light stick, you could bring a flash, whatever light source you want to use that could provide more light to your frame, in this case car. That's going to be best, that's going to have the best results for you. Now personally, I am not the best and I don't have much experience with nighttime car photography, so I can't give you guys too many tips, but do follow these Instagram accounts that specialize in nighttime car photography, and you guys will learn a lot, or you guys will sort of get what I'm talking about. There are two other tips I want to give you guys before we wrap up this video. The first one is always keep your subject in focus. This sort of plays in with the aperture thing I talked about previously. Just make sure your frame is focused, or your subject is in focus. A lot of people like to have this difference, this contrast focus, where you have the background blurry and then your subject in focus, and that mostly is going to play around with very tight focal angles and very fast apertures, but just make sure your subject is in focus. Now the second tip is don't be afraid to use ISO. For beginner photographers out there, they might have heard from other people that, oh, if you use too much ISO, the image quality is going to be bad, just don't touch ISO. In my experience, that's not the case, and with the cameras that we have right now, in this age of very advanced cameras, you could push ISO more than you think, more than you could have in the past. So don't be afraid to use ISO. Having the right exposure is one of the main things that you want to have when you're taking photos. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to follow my Instagram if you want to see my car photos and what I'm doing, day to day, what kind of cars that I'm seeing. Make sure to follow my Instagram. Check out my website if you guys want to see my professional style photos, and comment down below what you guys want to see next, and I'll see you guys in the next time. Cheers.